Oseho froze, his breath hitched in his throat. The night air had been still, but now a cold wind rushed through the graveyard, rustling the trees like warning. He spun around, searching the shadows. No one was there. His hand trembled, but he forced himself to move. The golden beads, the rings, and the silver coins. He stuffed them into his pocket. Fear clawed at his chest, but greed was stronger. He climbed out of the grave, wiping his dirty hands on his torn shirt. Then a hand grabbed his ankle. A scream caught in his throat as he yanked his leg free. Stumbling backward, the grave was silent. The corpse was still. Had he imagined it? His heart thundered so loudly he could hear it echo in his ears. Without looking back, he ran. The forest felt darker, the paths unfamiliar. Branches nagged his clothes as if trying to hold him back. His legs burned, but he didn't stop running until he reached his hut. He slammed the door shut and collapsed onto his mat. The village of Akomo was a quiet and peaceful place, surrounded by thick forests and flowing rivers. The people lived simple lives, bound by traditions that had existed for centuries. Among these customs, one rule stood above all: never disturb the dead. Beyond the village, hidden deep in the forest, lay an ancient graveyard. It was a place of fear, spoken of in hushed whispers. The elders warned that the spirit of the ancestors roamed there, watching, waiting. Anyone who dared to steal from the dead would be cursed, a punishment no priest could undo. Oseho, a 14-year-old orphan, did not care for such warnings. Hunger gnawed at his belly, and kindness had run out. The villagers had once given him scraps of food, but their generosity had faded. He was tired of begging, tired of sleeping with nothing in his stomach. One evening, he sat near the village square, listening to old Egberiko, a drunkard who talked too much. Chief Odaga was buried with gold, rings, beads, even silver coins. Egberiko muttered, his breath thick with palm wine. Such wealth wasted underground. Oseho's ear perked up. Chief Odaga had been the richest man in the village before his sudden death. His funeral had been grand, with feasting and wailing women. That night, as the village slept, Oseho made up his mind. He would steal from the dead. The moon hung low in the sky as Oseho crept towards the forbidden graveyard. The village was silent, the only sound coming from crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. He moved quickly, clutching a small shovel he had stolen from the blacksmith's yard. The path to the graveyard was covered in thick mist, making the trees look like shadowy figures watching him. His heart pounded, but he swallowed his fear. Hunger had driven him this far. There was no turning back. At last, he reached Chief Odaga's grave. The soil was still fresh, soft, and easy to dig. He wiped the sweat from his forehead and got to work. With each scoop of dirt, his mind replayed the warnings of the elders. The dead do not rest when disturbed. Oseho ignored the thought and dug faster. The deeper he went, the heavier the air around him felt. His breathing became ragged, his fingers numbed. After what felt like an eternity, his shovel hit something hard. The coffin. Ghost. He hesitated, then pried it open. A gust of foul-smelling air escaped, making him gag. Chief Odaga's body lay before him, stiff and pale, his mouth slightly open. But Oseho's eyes weren't on the corpse. They were on the gold beads around his neck and the heavy rings on his fingers. His hands trembling, he reached for the treasures as he yanked off the last ring. A voice whispered through the night, "Return what you have stolen." Oseho froze. His breath hitched in his throat. The night air had been still, but now a cold wind rushed through the graveyard, rustling like trees, like a warning. He spun around, searching the shadows. No one was there. His hand trembled, but he forced himself to move. The golden beads, the rings, the silver coins, he stuffed them into his pocket. Fear crawled at his chest, but greed was stronger. He climbed out of the grave, wiping his dirty hands on his torn shirt. Then a hand grabbed his ankle. A scream caught in his throat as he yanked off his leg free, stumbling backward. The grave was silent. The cup was sealed. But he imagined it. His heart pounded so loudly he could hear it. It echoed in its ears. Without looking back, he ran. The forest felt darker, the paths unfamiliar. Branches snagged his clothes, as if trying to hold him back. His leg burned, but he didn't stop running until he reached his hut. He slammed the door shut, collapsed onto his mouth, panting. His pocket felt heavy with stolen treasures, but he could shake the feeling that something was watching him. Just as he closed his eyes, a whisper drifted through the hut. "Return what you have stolen." Oseho's eyes snapped open. The room was empty, but in the corner, the shadow shifted. Oseho sat up, his body drenched in sweat. His heart was silent, but the whisper still echoed in his ears. He turned to the corner where the shadow had moved, his heart racing. Nothing. He swallowed hard. Maybe I imagined it. He lay back down, clenching the stolen beads in his hand. Tomorrow, he would sell them and buy enough food to last for weeks. He forced his eyes shut, willing himself to sleep. But sleep never came. A scratching sound came from outside his hut, slow, deliberate, like fingernails dragging against wood. Oseho held his breath. A rat! He wanted to believe it, but deep down he knew better. Then a knock at the door, soft at first, then louder. Oseho's body refused to move. Who knocks at this time of the hour? He stayed silent, hoping whoever it was would go away. The knocking stopped. He exhaled in relief. Then, in a voice as dry as rustling leaves, he heard, "Return what you have stolen." Oseho clutched his torn body to ice. He clutched the stolen treasures, shaking his head. "No, it's just my mind playing tricks on me." But then, something slid under the door, a piece of torn burial clothes, stained dirty. Oseho scrambled backward, his breath coming in gasps. Outside, footsteps shuffled away, but there was no one there. And the night was no longer silent. Something was breathing just outside his door. Oseho clutched his knees, rocking back and forth. His mind raced. This couldn't be real. The dead don't return, do they? The burial cloth lay still on the floor, its rotten scent filling the hut. His finger itched to throw it away, but he was too afraid to touch it. Outside, the breathing grew louder, heavy, ragged. wronged, then scratched. Long, slow nails against the wooden door. Oseho swallowed a scream. His lips moved, whispering in desperation a prayer, but his words trembled with fear. Go away, go away, go away. The scratching stopped. Silence. Oseho dared to inch forward. Maybe it was gone. Maybe the door was cracked. His heart stopped. A shadow fell through the tiny gaps beneath the door. A pair of feet, bared, covered in dirt, unmoving. Oseho pressed his back against the wall. He wanted to run, but where? The only way out was through the door. And behind that door stood what he doesn't know. Then the voice came again, closer this time. Return what you have stolen. Oseho squeezed his eyes shut. No, he wouldn't return it. He needed this treasure. Then the whisper changed. It wasn't outside anymore. It was behind him. Cold air brushed against his neck. He spun around, but no one was there. And yet, in the darkness, something breathed beside him. Oseho sat frozen, his back pressed against the wall of the hut. His breath came in shallow gasps, his mind screaming for him to run, but his leg would not move. The whisper had been inside the hut, right behind him, and yet there was nothing there, no shadow, no figure, just air as cold as the grave. His fingers clenched the golden beads. He had risked too much to turn back now. Maybe it's all in my head, he told himself. Maybe I'm just tired. But the village had gone unnaturally silent. Even the cricket had stopped singing. The weight of the unseen pressed down on him. Then, knock, knock, knock. Slow, steady from the window. Oseho's stomach dropped. He had locked the door, but not the window. His gaze snapped towards it. The wooden frame was shut, but the cloth covering it swayed as if something was breathing against it. Return what you have stolen. The whisper was now all around him. Oseho's finger dug into his arms. This can't be real. He needed the morning to come. If he could just make it to sunrise, everything would be fine. He curled up on his mat, squeezing his eyes shut. But even as exhaustion took over him, he knew one thing: something was waiting for him. And it would not leave until it got what it wanted. The first ray of dawn crept through the tiny gaps in Oseho's hut. He sat up, his body stiff with fear. He had not slept, not truly. Every time his eyes had closed, whispers filled his ears. Return what you have stolen. He shivered at the memory of that. But now the sun was rising. The spirits could not haunt him in daylight. Could they? Oseho forced himself to stand, his legs weak. He reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the stolen treasure. The weight of the gold gave him courage. I will sell them today. He stepped outside, inhaling the morning air. The village had come to life. Women fetching water, men preparing for the day's work. Everything seemed normal until he saw them. A group of elders stood near the village square, whispering among themselves. They glanced at him, their expressions grim. Then old Mama Adia grasped, pointing at him with a trembling hand. The mark, the mark, the mark of the dead. Oseho's blood ran cold.